Well, it's been a wild week here in Ordure Creek, Wisconsin, my hometown. Fall has come back to Wisconsin, and the temperatures have been in the 50s this week as the skies have gone from blue and sunny to gloomy and rainy. This is the time of year where the foreboding of eternal winter darkness begins to permeate all aspects of our lives. And yet, most of us aren't thinking about it at all. For most, it's actually our favorite time of year. The settling temperatures are a welcome relief to our Wisconsin bulk. We can enjoy the outdoors comfortably without having to sweat away 10 pounds. And autumn brings with it the smell of campfires and football and dead mosquitoes, all things that we love. The landscape is on fire with reds, oranges, and yellows of the leaves turning, which signals the beginning of the 3-month holiday season of corn mazes and Halloween and Agabrot and Harvest Festival. Thanksgiving, Christmas, and hunting season are what we have to look forward to for the next 3 months. Autumn in central Wisconsin is truly a glorious time for everyone, and this year even more so since the Packers have started off their season on fire at 4-0 and clearly look to be one of the strongest teams in the NFL at the moment. That translates into smiles and good moods all around. Although not for everybody, as Uncle Sticky's one-stop adult shop over on Church Street was the big news in Ordure Creek this week after they had joined the many other local shops and restaurants in offering curbside pickup for their various, quote, food items like edible panties and lollipops in the shapes of veiny cocks and chocolates molded to the shape of your favorite porno actress's butthole. Items that one would ordinarily have to go inside the store to obtain, something out of reach and forbidden by anyone under the age of 18. And so the problem arose because these orders can be made online and delivered outside, and no one had to actually go into the store for them. While selling pornography to anyone under the age of 18 is clearly illegal, what isn't so clear is whether or not candy items could be sold to minors. So the curbside pickup of these debauched delectables opened an entire market for droves of giggling teenagers who were more than happy to patronize Uncle Sticky's curbside, quote, food sales. Predictably, this caused a stir of outrage among many of the townsfolk, but not before the town was already awash in chocolate buttholes and cocksuckers. Mrs. Markham, the 74-year-old lady who you may remember had her cat Mr. Whiskers kidnapped a few weeks ago, was one of the first victims of the controversial candy, having received a bag full of gummy dicks, called, of course, Bag-O-Dicks, accompanied by a note that read, "Dear Mrs. Markham, eat a bag of dicks." So shocked was she at the distasteful gift, she became woozy, losing her balance, stepping on Mr. Whisker's tail, which startled both of them, causing Mrs. Markham to topple over, and while doing so, reflectively grasping the tablecloth on her way to the floor and pulling her spaghetti dinner along with Mr. Whisker's plate of Fancy Feast right on top of herself. Officers Andrew Slater and Hope Reed arrived to take the report. To them, the strangest part of the whole ordeal was the revelation that Mr. Whiskers had his own place at the table with his own plate. And the two officers discussed this at length on their way back to the station, where they would file away the report in the massive Mrs. Markham complaint file, and no further action would ever be taken. As of this writing, no one has yet stepped up to claim responsibility for the bag of dicks sent to her, or any explanation as to why they did it. The Mrs. Markham incident was just the first known case. Many others would soon follow. 13-year-old Brian Olmstead and his friends got locally famous for making TikTok videos of their parents blithely sucking away on porno actress butthole chocolates, while struggling to suppress laughter as they asked their parents questions about how much they enjoyed the chocolates, and they enjoyed rolling the chocolates around on their tongues, and things like that, teenage boy stuff. Marissa Adelson busted out some cocksuckers during a sleepover at her house where she and her friends laughed at each other and made comments about each other's sucking techniques, all fun and games until Mom walked in without knocking and was horrified to discover what was going on. Within days, the phone at Uncle Sticky's one-stop adult shop wouldn't stop ringing, while the negative reviews poured in all over the Google and Facebook pages by parents relating many more stories of shock and horror. It's actually the perfect way to ring in the Halloween season in unprecedented and hilarious fashion. Well, because of this outpouring of hate, the store's owner, Glenn Carson, was eventually forced to relent in the candy sales and even gave a fake apology to all involved. The truth was that Glenn happens to be a master marketer and knew exactly what he was doing. He knew selling candy to the kids would drum up publicity for the store and show off some of the store's wares to people who thought themselves perhaps too good to frequent such a seedy establishment such as his. He needed a way to show people that Uncle Sticky's is more than just pornography, it's about fun. And sure enough, within a week of his banning candy sales to edgy, pranking teenagers, the sales remained high as their parents came into the store looking for those delicious and funny candies for themselves or gifts for their friends. And while there, of course, to help themselves to another item or two, toy or a magazine, not that you'd admit that to others. And anytime a close acquaintance happened to see your car in the parking lot, it became a common refrain that you only went to Uncle Sticky's for the candy, sort of like how people only used to get the Dairy State Playmate for the articles. Of course, Glenn Carson isn't new to controversy. You don't own a store like this and escape controversy in a town of less than 30,000 people. Uncle Sticky's one-stop adult shop was born and raised in the flames of controversy back in the early 90s, back before the internet came along to give everyone billions of pages full of naked people for free, back when a man could make an honest living selling VHS copies of Schoolgirl Backdoor Action for $65 a pop. The word shop in the name of the store is even spelled SHOPPE to give it a touch of class, a callback to the golden days when a man didn't have to sneak in and out of a store such as this, as though they were doing something secretive and filthy. Of course, no such a time ever existed anywhere in American history, a history fraught with Puritans and teetotalers and social purity movements, moralists, anti-gamblers, Baptists, prohibitionists of every stripe imaginable. It seems odd that the land of the free should have such a colorful history of coerced restraint, and it continues to this day. All the old prohibitions are just being updated and replaced with new ones, anti-gunners, word bans, book revisions, etc. No matter where you are on Earth, from the land of the free to North Korea and everything in between, someone somewhere is always going to be trying to eliminate your good time. And it's no different here in Ordure Creek. For as much as the town loves its alcohol, gambling, drugs, and titties, there's plenty of Catholics and Baptists here to at least attempt to stop these undesirable aspects from creeping in, an attempt they lost decades ago with Uncle Sticky's. Moral outrage immediately arose from the moment Glenn made his new store intentions known to the city zoning commission, and the religious wing of Ordure Creek fought the good but losing battle to stop it. But that doesn't get them down. When the Lord calls upon you to stand up to the hellbound, you tend to be relentless in that pursuit. If you win that battle, God was on your side to grant you the victory, and if you lose the battle, then you either didn't work hard enough on God's behalf, or else God was using the current moral abomination to teach a lesson on the decaying nature of sin. In Glenn's case, it was a battle won simply because in the early 90s there was no internet for most, and the city council back then was full of men who had to drive almost an hour southwest to Oshkosh just to get their porn and porn accessories from Supreme Video, or else drive an hour to the southeast to hit the Spice Shop in Plainfield. These were men who had to create elaborate lies to tell their wives as to why they needed to disappear for nearly half a day. Men pragmatic enough to ask themselves, well, why drive anywhere at all? The beauty for a city council member in having someone open a porn shop, aside from meeting your own secret personal needs, is that you don't have to defend the moral implications of the store in order to support it. You just had to make a free market case for it. That way you can be a good, upstanding, church-going Republican who simply shrugs and says that the local government shouldn't be interfering in business endeavors. The Baptists, of course, would say that's just how the devil deceives you, that sneaky reasoned logic in support of personal freedom. The biggest point of contention was the location of the proposed store. Glenn originally wanted a storefront right on Main Street, nestled between Crystal's Diner and the Reader's Eden bookstore, but that was immediately rejected. After all, Main Street had to be an unblemished tourist haven, especially during the summer months when thousands of people would return from Florida and Arizona to their summer homes on Lake Kakadze. The people who frequented Main Street most wanted a couple of diners and some overpriced specialty stores and even a few bars, but a porno shop was pushing it. No Lake Kakadze housewife wanted to walk their children past enticing flashing neon lights after breakfast at Crystal's and then spend the next hour trying to explain to the child why they were stuck browsing boring books and knickknacks but couldn't go into the one store that looked super amazing and fun. Wasn't going to happen, Glenn. So the only other highly trafficked spot with an available storefront was the old Sneaky Pete's pawn shop next to the Quick Trip on Church Street. But this too caused more than one of the council members to raise an eyebrow. I'm here with you, Glenn, Harlow Johansson said during one of the planning commission meetings, but Church Street just seems a little bit too blasphemy, don't you think? Well, Glenn replied, where should I put it? A street named after one of the town fathers, perhaps? Maybe on a street named after one of the founders of the nation, like Washington Street? Glenn had a point. If they were going to quibble over street names, there really weren't a lot of options. Oddly enough, during the hundreds of years of building up the town, no one had the foresight to name a street Carnal Knowledge Street or Titty Street. No matter where the new store went, most people in town really wouldn't care, and those who did were going to protest against it one way or another. Sure enough, no sooner had the council moved to approve the new store that the great debate commenced. It actually wasn't so much of a debate as it was a few religious groups in town made a lot of noise about it. The nuns who ran the local Catholic school, the Sisters of Perpetual Scowling, were the first ones on the scene, making their solemn exodus on foot from their convent to the new site of future degeneracy, making quite a show as they walked single file in full nun regalia, heads bowed, rosaries in hand, singing those Catholic chants that if you aren't Catholic sound ancient and mystical. An ambulance even joined the procession as 82-year-old Sister Mary the Pure fainted from heat exhaustion along the way. After she was rushed to Ordure Creek General Hospital, it was decided that a group of paramedics should probably stick close by just in case another casualty occurred here on the front lines of the battlefield of righteousness. After their march, they took up positions in front of the store holding signs that admonished people not to allow the devil to move into their town and proclaiming warnings of damnation for lust. And the protests went on for several days as Glenn blithely worked on the building's maintenance and moved in his stock. He'd even take a break every once in a while to bring the aged, scowling sisters some water or order them some sandwiches from the local Subway. Glenn, being the savvy businessman he is, gladly welcomed the protests. It was about 2 days into the sisters' protest before the Baptists caught wind of what was going on, and not to be outdone by the apostate Catholics, Pastor Jack Ovidal summoned his flock from the Brimstone Baptist Church to also take to the streets in objection to the local abomination. Of course, they took to the other side of the street. They wouldn't want to be seen by God standing with the Catholics because what fellowship has light with darkness? And the abomination that Pastor Jack's flock gathered to reprimand wasn't just Glenn's store, but the sisters themselves, which explains some of the signs that the flock held, exhibiting verses calling for the repentance of those who had fallen away from the true faith and things of that nature. Ultimately, the sisters achieved exactly what they wanted, which was to draw a lot of attention to the store. People would stop at the picket line of Black Habits to see what all the commotion was about. No one would approach Ovidal's group simply because they didn't want the born-again lecture and get handed the Bible tract that they were just going to have to throw away later. So they would approach the nuns, and they would ask what new evil had come to town that the Sisters of Perpetual Scowling should be brought forth from the sanctuary of the convent and take to the streets. And the sisters would gladly inform them. What you see here is the building of a wicked den of the most vile smut, and instruments of self-pleasure that tempt the very flames of hellfire into your soul. Oh, that's horrible, they'd say. Just awful. Tell me, sister, just when does this den of iniquity open so that I may stay far away from its corrupting influence? And the sisters would answer, next Thursday at 8. And the passerbys would thank them profusely and promise to warn their friends. And that's how everybody found out about the new porno shop in town, and Glenn's grand opening was a smashing success without his ever spending a dime on advertising. And here we are now, nearly 30 years later, following the curbside candy craze of 2020, Uncle Sticky's had recaptured some of its former magic as people filed in, sheepishly looking around to make sure no one that they knew was in here as well. They'd find the particular candy they were looking for fairly quickly, then be lured off to browse the vast selection of adult content and toys. Not long afterwards, the candy wouldn't be the only thing that they walked out with. But what those other items were and who had bought them, well, that'll be our little secret. And that's the latest from Ordure Creek, Wisconsin this week, where the beer is thick, the cheese is fresh, and the Packers are undefeated. If you're enjoying this podcast, share it with the ones you love. Don't keep good things to yourself. Let others know about it. If you really enjoy this podcast, give it a thumbs up on the Facebook page at Dairy State Pub Crawl. If you really love this podcast, consider throwing $1 or $2 into my beggar's cup over at patreon.com/dairystate and get some access to some sweet bonus features. As soon as I put some up.